All right, so welcome everyone to this winter term gathering, I would say, speed dating event of the LSE-Miguel Dols Fellows at the Cañada Ranch Center. So we have a tradition here at the Cañada Ranch that every term all the fellows, they have one obligation is to conduct research while they're here at the LSE and to present it to their peers and to whoever wants to come listen and to offer a scrutiny. This time we're going to do it in a sort of speed dating because there are so many high quality fellows and we have 11 presentations. So first I'm going to introduce myself. I am Andres Rodriguez Bose. I'm the director of the Cañada Ranch Center and we'd like to thank Mercedes, who has been behind most of the logistics of securing that everything is working according to plan, and also to have the presence of Juan Dols, who is one of the great benefactors of the Cañada Ranch Center at the LSE, and also a member of the Fundación Cañada Ranch in Valencia. So we're going to do a speed dating session in which you're going to have 10 minutes, and there will be 1 minute for questions. Why? Because if you cannot say in 10 minutes what your research is about, then you might as well do something else. I know that we academics have a tendency to go and try to present our things in 40 minutes, but we need to present what we do to a wider public, and we come from very different fields. So given the situation and time constraints, I think 10 minutes is more than enough. And also because most of you would like to go for dinner afterwards, and we have a reservation at 8:30, so we need to make it. Otherwise, you'll hear a lot. You'll have a lot of food for thought, but no food in your stomach, and you might want to have both. So a lot of thinking that will be followed by a nice discussion afterwards. So without further ado, you don't want to listen to me for too long. I'm going to introduce our first fellow, who is Alessio Costanzo Fedele, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Pescara, Gabriele D'Annunzio, and he's going to be talking about institutional quality and the absorption of EU funds. So, Gabriele, the floor is yours. Alessio, sorry.
Sorry, I'm just going to remove this.
I'm going to do it as I do it in my classes. I'll give you 5 minutes and a 1 minute warning. So Alessio, you have 10 minutes and your 10 minutes start now.
Okay, thank you. Good evening to everyone. For this occasion, I decided to share with you my research project. The title is Institutional Quality and the Absorption of EU Funds, a comparative spatial analysis of cohesion policy and RRF in Italy and Spain. I'm sorry. Okay. In this table, we have different funds and different governance models, because in recent years, different models have emerged in the European Union that represent a significant change for institutions. And the question is, are these overlap and paradigm shift positive for regions or not? On one side, we have the cohesion policy, the cohesion funds, decentralized, bottom-up, place-based model structured on certified spending. And the other side, we have the NRRP, so a centralized top-down and performance-based model structured on milestone and target. And the challenge is to understand whether this change in governance will help historically laggard regions to accelerate or to reinforce the institutional bottlenecks. Then we have, okay.
Maybe you can scroll down, like manually. Yeah.
Okay.
We do have sorts of precious creatures,
Let's go, you have to,
but you can go like that.
Okay.
now there's one other thing.
Figure it out for the next presentation.
Okay. So you got 1 minute more. Yeah.
And I will use the 2021 Quality of Government Index as a benchmark for institutional quality. And as you can see, the quality of government level is not homogeneous. In Europe, there is a clear spatial divergence in both countries, Italy and Spain. And this variable is the core of the research. I start from the assumption that impartial and transparent institutions, are a necessary condition for ensuring funds are not wasted. And without institutional quality, investments may have no long-term impact on the economy or even a negative impact on economic development, reinforcing the development traps of underperforming regions. The theoretical framework here is based on the governance, institutions, and spatial interdependence. Regional institutional quality acts as a filter, and in a centralized system, regions with low governance quality become bottlenecks that reduce the absorption of cohesion funds, ultimately reinforcing regional development traps. And the importance in this research is also to understand, to know the spatial interdependence between institutional quality and the execution rate of cohesion funds, and also, sorry, not of cohesion funds, but on the NRP project and funds. And we go to the research question and hypothesis. The research question is, does regional institutional quality act as a mechanism for breaking or reinforcing historical path dependency in the transition from cohesion policy to the NRRP, and how national governance and spatial spillovers modulate this absorptive capacity in Italy and Spain? The H1, so the hypothesis 1 is path dependency. The second hypothesis is the administrative saturation. The sectorality is the third, and the spatial spillover is the fourth. And in the third one, the efficiency of the NRRP implementation is constrained by the historical performance of cohesion 2014-2020, confirming a path dependency trajectory exacerbated by institutional quality. In the second hypothesis, the massive injection of funds into regions with low absorptive capacity generates administrative saturation. In the third, the spending capacity in highly complex sectors such as research, high-tech, green, digital, human capital is more EQI sensitive than in traditional infrastructure. And the fourth one is the asymmetric spatial spillover. So the NRRP implementation performance is subject to asymmetric spillover effects, conditioned by the institutional quality of neighboring regions. And methodology. The sample is N36, so 36 NUTS 2-level regions, 20 in Italy and 16 in Spain, included islands such as Sicily, Sardinia, and the
5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, and Balearic Islands. The methodology is mixed, so quantitative and qualitative, but it's divided in 3 phases: the preliminary robustness test, the quantitative spatial analysis with the spatial Darby model, SDM, used to analyze the direct and indirect effects, institutional quality on NRRP absorption, and for calculating also the spatial weights matrix to intercept institutional spillover based on geographical criterion of key nearest neighbors, to include islands and insertion of interaction terms, stress factors, and the robustness analysis at the end. And third, phase comparative qualitative analysis for to identify divergences in regional response capacity, so interviews to institutional and territorial socioeconomic actors. In this table, we have all the elements of the model that I want to use. So dependent variable, NRRP execution rate, the output, the main explanatory variable, so the quality of institutions. Then there are three variables of interest. So path dependency, NRRP regional investment intensity and sectorality. And then we have control variables and spatial weight matrix. This conceptual framework helps us to understand the slide before, because we have stress factors that moderates the relationship between the institutional filter, so the European Quality of Government Index, and the NRRP execution rate. Then there's a geographical criterion and robustness factors that impact the outcome. Policy implication. The expected results are a positive correlation between X1 and Y. High institutional quality is expected to significantly increase NRP absorption rates, confirming the institutional filter theory. Then the impact of stress factors, regions with greater financial pressure and historically low spending capacity, will show a weaker relationship between governance and performance, demonstrating the presence of administrative bottlenecks. And third, the spatial spillovers, so suggesting that a region's performance is positively influenced by the institutional quality of neighboring regions, so the presence of a contagion effect. Last, policy implications, so the support for territorial governance in relation to the studies on institutional quality and efficiency of the NRRP funds. The European Union and national governments should provide targeted technical assistance to regions that show institutional bottlenecks, so the laggard region. And the second is the strengthening trans-regional ecosystem because of spatial spillovers. Policy intervention should encourage trans-regional cooperation to take advantage of the positive influence of more efficient neighboring administrations. And the third, balancing performance and capacity. So the shift to a performance-based model requires a parallel investment in territorial administrative capacity to ensure that pressure from financial allocations does not result in inefficient spending or delays in project implementation. That's all. These are the references. And I want to conclude with this. The first, geography law. Everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things.
Okay, thank you very much, Alessio. And done in 9 minutes, so we have a minute and a half for you. Stay there, you're not leaving. So now questions from the audience. Question 1, questions 2, questions 3. So my turn to ask a question then.
Okay.
You're looking at the impact of how institutional quality at some national level actually shapes the returns of a particular fund, which is the next generation type of funds, RRF and PRR, or and the different denominations. But you also mentioned the cohesion funds, the current development policy. To what extent do you think, and these are two policies that have got a very different philosophy. One is far more bottom-up, the cohesion policy. The other one is far more top-down, established by Europe and by national governments. To what extent do you think that institutional quality actually contributes more to improve the delivery of any of those two funds? And if you were to be a policymaker, which one would you recommend?
I recommend not the top-down approach. So in this case, I recommend the cohesion funds. So not the cohesion funds, the model, the structure of cohesion funds. So the approach used for the cohesion funds. and also for the time, because the NRRP are more, for example, in Italy, we have 190 billions of euro in 5 years. So Italian institutions have to spend this in 5 years. And we have 3 billions of euro for the cohesion funds, but in 7 or 10 years. Also, this create an impact on the institutional capacity of the institutions, of the regions. But the model, the challenge is to understand how the capacity of institutions, starting from the baseline of the cohesion funds, is able to reinforce or not the NRRP execution rate in the future. I don't know if I answer you.
Yeah, absolutely. So unless there's any urgent question, thank you very much. So then, Alessio.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Susanna. And Dr. Susanna Frick, she is a lecturer, as we now call them here at the LSE, assistant professor in economic geography at Cardiff University in the UK. And she's going to talk about state development banks and the spatial diffusion of finance.
Thank you very much, Andres.
And a way we can put it in.
Sharing this room. So just to say, this is joint work, and this is the first paper that we're hoping to submit soon in a series of papers, and what I'm hoping to become a larger research agenda for myself, which essentially revolves around the role of state development banks and how they can contribute to reduction in regional disparities.
Okay, so you have 10 minutes and they start now.
Perfect. Okay, just a quick background. So state development banks, not everyone might be familiar with the term. So essentially they are established to provide credit and other financial services to individuals, firms, strategic sectors of the economy that private financial institutions were unable or unwilling to serve to the extent desired. Okay, so they're state-funded, state-owned companies that can be co-owned between the state and the private sector, but they need to have a large share of public ownership, essentially. Is that a relevant phenomenon to look at? Just to put the numbers, there are over 500 national and subnational development banks in the world. So literally every country in the world has a few of them. They have 23 trillion in assets under management. To give a sense of the size, that is more than the combined GDP of the European Union. So they have a lot of funds under management. It's interesting because for a long time, essentially, there was very little research on these institutions, despite them being so proliferated and having so much funding under management. There's an old body of literature that essentially looks at developing countries, but there was very few literature actually on the developed economies. Over the past about 10 years, there has been a resurgence of interest in this topic. So there's a growing body of literature that looks at the role of state development banks to foster industrial upgrading, innovation. It looks at the role of state development banks for the green transition, etc. So there is a growing body of literature that highlights state development banks as a very important and relevant tool for a number of policy areas. What this literature so far hasn't done at all is essentially to look at the spatial dimensions of state development banks. And that on the one side means we haven't looked at, we know there are significant funding flows, but we don't actually know where they go. Do they go into lagging regions? Do they go in already prosperous regions? So do they actually reinforce core periphery patterns? Do they alleviate them? But we also don't really know whether state development banks should have a role in regional development, okay? There's apart from a 1992 paper by Stiglitz, there's essentially no literature on that. I find it particularly interesting or surprising that there's no literature on that because actually a few of these development banks, they have the specific mission to promote regional development. So it's a curious omission for me in the literature that no one has really looked at this over the last few years. So the question is essentially what role can state development banks play in addressing access to finance challenges in lagging regions, and what do they do in practice? So this is, as I said, is one of the first paper I'm hoping to grow a larger research agenda around that. And actually, I already connected with one of the other fellows who happens to have a really nice data set on this for Brazil. So I'm going to start working with them on this. Just very briefly, also kind of what is the challenge? Why do we need state development banks? So I don't think I need to explain to anyone here that there are very persistent and even growing spatial inequalities in a number of countries. We see this all around the world. What is maybe more what is maybe newer in the literature is that we're thinking there are access to finance differences, so spatial variations in the availability, but also in the pricing of finance in regions within a country. And we're thinking this might be contributing to these spatial disparities. Hence the question, can state development banks help to alleviate these funding constraints that companies, but also public institutions might actually face in lagging regions? I'm not going to go into the mechanisms because I don't think I have much time to do that. So the first step, or kind of the first task that we put ourselves was to think about, okay, from a conceptual perspective, should they even have a role, right? Just because they're there and there's an issue doesn't mean they should be looking at the issue. But we would argue that there is actually a role for them. First reason being informational failures, okay? So information gathering is a very important part of any financing decision. And of course, there are a lot of hard information, so the quantitative bits that you can see in the firm's account, right? How well are they doing, how profitable they are. But there's also always the element of more soft information around the management. So how much do I actually believe the management will be doing? Like how much do you believe the management is actually capable of delivering on the project they are proposing? What we're seeing in the current literature is that the further firms are away from the lender, the more difficult it is to actually access this sort of information. Hence, typically, they're either being rejected or prices become higher, just because it's more costly to gather this information. What we're also knowing is that in a lot of countries, we're seeing a concentration of the banking sector, where a lot of the financing decisions are being taken more centrally. Bank branches are closing down in areas, hence, this is becoming important. So informational failures being a first conceptual argument of why we would say there could be a role for state development banks. The second one is positive externalities in the presence of agglomeration economy. Okay, so one of the key reasons why it's often argued that state development banks should get involved is if there is essentially a higher public return than a private return. Okay, so you have a project that actually generates externalities in whatever form, meaning the private investor can actually not internalize these benefits, but it would be beneficial for society, actually, if you look at the wider public benefits. So you can make this argument as well around agglomeration economies. So if you think about secondary cities, they might lack a critical mass, might be challenging for them to grow. So an investment in this area, either of a new company, but also helping an existing company to grow, actually generates positive externalities because it actually helps to create this critical mass. Hence, here again, it might be helpful for the State Development Bank to invest, to help kind of make this project happen. And then the final argument is there could also be a political argument. Okay, so investment in a lagging region might actually help to reduce spatial disparities and access to finance, but also more widely might help to create social cohesion. So you might as well just make this argument, okay? So if social cohesion is something that is valued in a society, you could make the argument that for political reasons, the state development should get involved. It's not purely for market reasons.
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. So essentially, we're arguing there are conceptual reasons to do this, for state developments to get involved. Now, the question was, now how far do they actually do this? And we started by looking at 3 large development banks in Europe, being the German KfW, which is probably the largest one, is one of the largest banks actually in the entire world, BPI France, and then the European Investment Bank. Okay, so we have 3 large institutions at differing levels, but all of them with significant funds under management, hence having quite a possible quite significant impact in terms of financing. I'm not going to go into the details here, given that I have 3 minutes. So I'm going to go really briefly through that. So what we saw is that essentially KfW in Germany, they don't have an explicit mandate for regional development, but operationally, they do have an important impact. So KfW is a state-backed development bank that can actually raise financing on international markets quite cheaply, and they distribute that through the German decentralized banking system. And in this way, they actually make sure that places that are even further away, they have access to cheap financing, okay? And on top, they have a regionally differentiated pricing. That means areas that are considered development regions actually have access to lower interest rates. So no specific mandate, but they're essentially helping to capitalize the decentralized banking system in Germany. BPI France is different because they kind of implicitly recognize that regional development or the spatial aspects of their operations. So they have 50 branches across France, and they're very specific about that they need to have these branches in order to actually get over these informational failures and go out and find the relevant projects. So they don't have a specific mission because their mission is just one-stop shop for entrepreneurs, but they do heavily emphasize that they're decentralized and thereby contribute to regional development. And then finally, the European Investment Bank is the one that is most explicit about it. So they have a clear political mandate to actually contribute to cohesion. And they have a clear target to dedicate at least 45% of its total financing in cohesion regions. Okay, so they have a set target of their funding operation that need to go into lagging regions. So they're very specific about that. Okay, so a bit of a tour de force through this topic, but essentially what we can say, there's a revived interest in state development banks in the literature, but there hasn't been much interest in the question of kind of the spatial implications of their funding operations. We argue that there are clear reasons, conceptual reasons of why they should get involved in regional development. And that when we look at the three large cases in Europe, we see that some of them do more explicitly than others actually include regional development, but it's mainly around political reasons and informational failure. So our second argument about kind of shaping markets by trying to create agglomeration economies, that's not something that has been taken into account yet.
Okay, thank you very much. We have 1 minute for questions to Susanne. Who wants to ask a killer question? 1, 2, 3, so it's down to me again. All right, so language matters.
Yeah.
And matters a lot. These are not development banks. These are investment banks. Although you have highlighted that they have, I mean, they're called investment banks in all cases. You have highlighted that even though they're investment banks, they have different mandates going from the German bank, some intermediate in the case of the French bank,
Yeah.
and the more explicit, the European Investment Bank. Does having a specific mandate for territorial development and cohesion make them more efficient at actually delivering cohesion or not?
Yeah, I cannot answer that question. So first of all, on the question of the name, I think they all have different names. So I wouldn't say they're necessarily investment banks. On the question of whether they do, so that's what we're working on at the moment. We're actually explicitly mapping where their funding allocations go to. At the moment, we started off with the case of KfW in Germany. And I think it's an open question that we would like to investigate. But no, I cannot tell you at the moment.
Okay.
But that's essentially where we're trying to get to.
So thank you very much. Any other questions? No, if not, thank you very much, Susanne. And next on is Yago Morarcas, who is a PhD candidate just across the road here at King's College, London, UK, who is going to be talking about transnational connections in times of change, career activist networks during the Spanish transition to democracy, 1976 in 1982.
Well, thank you so much.
Oh, I do have a pointer. I just forgot about that. So, you want to do?
Yeah, sure. Just walking around. That was the
It's down is
Yeah,
forward.
okay. Hi, so thank you everyone for having me here.
Just try it.
Yeah.
So see if
Yeah.
no, then now we have to press. Now
Yeah.
yes. Then go back.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
Okay. Great.
All right, so
Um,
you have 10 minutes and your 10 minutes start now.
Great. Yeah. So the frame where this research fits is basically that in the last few decades, there's been a renewed attention to a so-called transition from below. So the first studies from the Spanish transition to democracy looked at it basically as a pact between elites. Some elites were reformist elites coming from the regime. Some elites were from the opposition to the regime, and they mainly just focused on political parties, high-level civil servants, church, and so on. However, especially given the influence of the work of Commander Radcliffe, there has been renewed attention to the role of the changes that were taking place in civil society and how those shaped the transition as well. So this look at the civil society was especially at first focused on, for example, like neighborhood associations or the union movement, so really like bigger movements. But in the last like 5 to 10 years, we've started to look at also like smaller but highly influential and sedentarian movements. So for example, feminist groups, prison reform groups like the COPEL, disability activism, and also gay activism. So the impact of all these groups, which are relatively smaller in quantity, is twofold. On the one hand, they created incentives and pressure to legislators. So they were, for example, in the streets doing mass demonstrations, but they were also lobbying certain kinds of civil servants, for example. And they also helped to transform the social tissue on the ground. So how people thought about these topics, how people felt about these topics, and how people cared or not about these topics. So
it's my bad because
no, that's
I'm just not sharing.
yeah, perfect. So in the case of gay activism in Spain, they couldn't have achieved the successes they achieved if it weren't for the transnational connections. So they relied on a really big network of transnational and mostly transatlantic connections. So unlike this was common for other movements in Europe, but what's very distinctive about the Spanish case is that Latin America, as you see, is very key here. So Argentina was very important, Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, Puerto Rico, Mexico, Chile as well, and the US as well. And then also European groups such as the French ones, the Swedish ones, the Dutch ones, and the British ones. So, well, and very briefly, the case of Argentina is like one of the most characteristics of the Spanish movements because their support followed sort of inverse path. So on the one hand, the Argentinian movement was very strong. The movement in Spain was almost non-existent. And the Argentinians gave a lot of support and training to the activists in Spain. But after the coup in Argentina, everyone had to flee the country and they mostly flew to Spain. And so the Spanish activists, now Franco had died already, the Spanish activists were growing a lot and they were now in a position to sort of provide political shelter to these Argentinian exiled activists. So from now on, I will be mainly discussing specific historical documents that have never been published before and that I've been finding this month in the LSE archives. So the first one is from a Swedish group led by Michael Holm, and it's a letter that is directed to different groups across Europe, and it's calling for them to mobilize and take part in their campaign to put pressure on the Spanish government to decriminalize homosexuality. So it's not dated, but it's from the early 70s. And this person, Michael Holm, also had a really popular magazine called Revolt. And when the Spanish government targeted the only gay publication in Spain at the time, which was being published from France, they went to the embassy in France and they pressured them to stop publishing, to stop allowing it to be published. This Swedish group said, okay, we'll publish it for you from Sweden. So instead of being published from there. So that's likely where the context between these groups and the Spanish context is started. And the reason why this is at the LSE archives is because one of the groups that it was addressed to was the Campaign for Homosexual Equality, which was the biggest group in the UK. The second letter, which is probably even more interesting, was sent by Arcadie, one of the main French groups, in 1976. It is addressed directly from its director to the PM, Arias Navarro, to the Minister of Interior, Rodriguez, and to the Vice President, Manuel Fraga. And in it calls to
5 minutes.
yeah, and in it calls to decriminalize homosexuality, and it refers to the support of activists from all these countries, which are also monarchies, but do not actively persecute homosexuality the way that Spain was doing at the time. And this was bi-directional. So the Spanish groups were also contacting themselves international groups. And this is by the Basque group, EGAM. It was inside one of their magazines, which is held in the collection of the Campaign for Homosexual Equality. And it is calling on them to establish friendly contact with the Basque groups. And the Catalan Gay Liberation Front, which is the biggest one, also published an international monthly newsletter. And it's also in the field in the archives of the Campaign for Homosexual Equality from the UK. And the main key finding that I found over these months is the gay Christian groups. So until now, no mention in any strand of the literature mention transnational connections between gay Christian groups. Turns out that they did exist and that Spain seems to have been quite important in them from a very early stage. So from 1973, the first mentions in the French archives, and from 1976 in the UK Gay Christian Movement archives, which is also in LSE. The UK group had specific liaison for Spain, which didn't happen for any other country except for France. So it suggests that Spain was a really big target, even from a time when no legal gay groups were operating in Spain, and when Francoism was still alive. So this relation continued in the next years, and there's even letters from the late 80s, such as this one, where there's an international European gathering of gay Christian groups, where the Barcelona group suggested creating an international annual prayer day for AIDS, because it's already post-AIDS in the late 80s. And the key question here is, what impact did this lesser known and smaller Christian groups have on the broader movement in Spain, but also on key actors that were not necessarily framed as activists, such as the Catholic Church, which had representation in the Spanish courts back then. So yeah, the conclusion is that this was, we cannot look at a transition from below if we don't take into account the transnational dimensions of it. And that includes the gay cases specifically, but also many other movements. So there were transnational feminist connections, for example. And it spanned a wealth of different geographical contexts. These were complex networks. There were ideological differences between them. There were specific strands of them, such as the Christian ones, which were at odds in many ways with, for example, the most radical ones. But what united all of them, despite this heterogeneity, was that they all wanted the abolition of the Social Dangerousness Act, which was criminalizing homosexuality in the country. And this made possible that in 1979, homosexuality was effectively decriminalized in Spain. And this is just one of several transitions from below that have still not been fully recovered. So yeah, and on the impact of the broader impact, I will be conducting further research on this by going to the National Catalan Archives and look at what trace did these Christian groups leave in the archive of the broader Catalan movement. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Errol. Questions? 1 minute for questions. Yes, Susanna, please.
One question, because you're looking at the 70s, right? So I was just wondering, how did the groups actually communicate with each other? Like, do you have any sense for how that went? Because obviously it was before the internet, where we could so easily communicate between countries and continents.
Yeah, well, easily is not a word that I've used here importantly. It was actually, it was not very easy, but it was through letters, so correspondence through networks of activists. But this was mostly between countries where homosexuality was illegal, so it was a risk because, for example, if they caught one person, they had the full list of contacts all around the world that they could share with like the intelligence of those countries. So there was a risk. So, for example, in the Argentinian case, which I mentioned was really important, what they did was once the key activists had already left the country, one stayed inside, and they burned the full archive of the movement so that no one else could contact activists outside since they had already been in exile. Yeah.
Any other questions? Not one question from me. You're putting emphasis on transnational activism and the support of transnational gay movements in the liberalization of Spain that went in almost lining place from being one of the most repressive to just 1 year or less than a year after the constitution was passed, the liberalizing gay relationships. But what is the role of international group pressure vis-a-vis the importance and the growing significance of national groups, so local groups within Spain, and relative to the change in attitudes itself as a result of a broader transition towards democracy?
Yeah, that's actually really important. And until now, this is like a problem in the literature, which has mostly emphasized the Catalan and the Madrid groups, and a little bit the Andalusian and Valencian ones. But it's been only like in the last 5 years that we've started to uncover that part of the success for these national groups was this capillarity. So they were reaching regions that you could never imagine that had active gay groups in 1977, 76, 78, such as Murcia, such as Cantabria, such as Aragon, Castile. They all had, in many provinces in Andalusia, had their own groups. So these networks, some of them were more active, some of them were less active, but they were definitely really important, not just in putting pressure, but in changing attitudes locally and regionally, rather than just at a national scale. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, well. So now we move on, and next up is Eleni Oikonomaki, who's a PhD candidate. You're defending now, so soon, very soon, at Aristotle University in Thessaloniki in Greece, and she's going to be talking about the LID framework, a new method for geospatial and exploratory data analysis of potential intervention determinants at the neighborhood level. So, Lenny, the floor is yours.
Yes. Do we have
The pointer is
Pointer.
right behind.
okay.
Right behind you. So you have 10 minutes.
Does it work?
Well, you have to press,
That's
well, I
fine.
have to press here. So now it should be working. No, no,
1 second.
try again.
It's okay. I will do it. from
No, but
here.
it's in theory it should.
I will do it here. So
Oh, I know, because you have to press in your computer.
it's fine. It's fine.
No, it should be. No,
It's okay. It's okay.
I know because yeah, it's only here, so it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's it.
So, yeah, hello everyone. I'm Eleni Oikonomaki and I'm a PhD candidate at Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Today I will present my project about local innovation determinants. It's the LID framework and database. I came up with this very long title in a way to capture my research interest and approach on leveraging geospatial big urban data for an exploratory analysis of innovation enabling factors at the neighborhood level. For this project, I would like to acknowledge my collaborator, Dimitrios Belivanis, and my supervisor, Christina Kakteri. But before I start, I would like to share a bit about the motivation of this research. Over the last decades, several scholars have identified that innovation performances change dramatically between different areas within the same region and highlighted the significance of geography, location, and proximity in fostering innovation as these activities exhibit special concentration. Andres and other scholars have highlighted how technological advances are unevenly concentrated in specific areas and how this reinforces spatial inequalities by creating a geography of centrality and one of marginality, with the top innovation performers and the left behind places. The numbers can tell clearly the story.
More than 70% of EU patent filings originate from fewer than 20% of the regions. In contrast, the bottom 40% of regions, what we call the left behind places, actually produce less than 10% of patents. And these numbers clearly indicate that there is a large spatial imbalance in innovation output, but also the entrepreneurial activities. In support of this, more recently, GRC published a report identifying how important it is to start developing more territorially sensitive metrics in order to support place-based interventions and ensure that all regions can contribute to, but also benefit from innovation-driven growth. For my research, I started by examining the waste, the morphology, these microenvironments, and the infrastructure that expresses innovation have evolved during the last decades from the first industrial districts, as described by Begattini, and then the traditional science park that was pioneered in Stanford University in the 50s, the booming of this model in the 80s, and today's innovation landscape with the establishment of innovation districts. At the same time, it was important to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the current toolkits and indicators we use to measure innovation. In a previous paper, actually identified that most of them are focusing on the national, regional level, and city level, most in the best cases, almost denying what has been identified by several scholars, that the neighborhood context contributes to innovation as knowledge spillovers from narrow distances. So what I find here as a main limitation is that actually there are very few observable neighborhood character measures that can be used to understand the local innovation across that are actually systemically available across neighborhoods. So we see that innovation geography studies continue to focus mainly on patents, R&D expenditure, firm level data at these higher spatial scales. More recently, I would say there have been some more empirical studies focusing on the urban form and how urban morphology associates with innovation performance. But these studies are focusing on specific aspects in a fragmented way, with few really offering a systematic framework that integrates diverse aspects of the neighborhoods. So this research responds to three main research questions, to these unanswered questions in the field. What are the key factors that enable neighborhoods to spark innovation? Can API and open source data reveal more about the local innovation capacities that census and other traditional sources miss? And do regional findings hold when examined at the neighborhood level? So to answer these questions, we propose the LEAD framework, which is influenced by the work of other scholars at the national level, the metro regional studies, but also urban theories from Jane Jacobs and Richard Florida. For our framework, LEAD basically focuses on local innovation capacity and what are the main determinants at that scale for innovation. And in this way, we want to create a framework, a spatial modeling and database in order to investigate which are these few neighborhood characteristics that are considered the enabling factors. In the end, we propose a LEAD, this place-based bottom-up data-driven framework that can support local innovation policy based on the actual strengths and needs of the neighborhoods. And we continue with the database. So for our analysis, we used the geospatial data to identify spatial clustering, but also hotspots. Then we used machine learning in order to predict innovation capacity and innovation potential at this neighborhood scale and identify which are the key variables. And we did a comparative analysis of difference in means for these key neighborhood characteristics between Massachusetts and New York. These are the two main case studies. We combine data from Census Bureau, governmental agencies, and city portals with other alternative data sources, such as that were captured through modern APIs. These are the Google Map, OpenStreetMap. And we came up with this multi-source neighborhood level tool for neighborhood analysis to understand the dynamics that are often obscured at these higher spatial scales. In total, we used 35 independent variables. One main dependent variable, which are the granted patents. We assess 2,351 zip codes in Massachusetts and New York State, and then we normalize per 1,000 residents all these count variables. We use inner join to merge all data on zip codes, and in the end, we keep all zip codes with census information. So if we would like to decompose our database, we could see that we have 4 main categories. The first is the social factors, the economic, land use and mobility, morphology and environment. And we use gradient patterns, as I mentioned, this is the main output for the study. I will not cover the correlation test because we don't have much time, but so what we did was mainly we continued with AI modeling, to identify which features are the most important for the model. And to do that, we used the feature importance algorithm. Basically, for those that are not very familiar, it's a random forest that calculates a score for all these input variables to identify which are the determinants that the model repeatedly uses for the prediction rules. And we compared the importance across New York and Massachusetts, but also we ran the model with the overall dataset for both states. In total, here we ended up with 10 features, and then based on these variables, we looked at the correlation tables. We continued with difference in means across these 4 analytical samples. We tried to understand what are the differences of these variables across, let's say, the first analytical sample are all zip codes of the state, the second are the innovative zip codes, the third are the emerging ones, and the last are the dense zip codes. So I will get very shortly to this. I will not have the time to discuss the table, but in short, the first findings are that there is a strong indication that very few early neighborhood characteristics in a neighborhood are really highly associated with innovation output. And specifically, we find that H1B, it's a proxy for highly skilled immigrants in the US. It's one of the main predictors. The percentage of educated people living in the neighborhood, the percentage of people walking, biking to work, and the presence of innovation spaces have emerged as some of these key characteristics. In the end, what we propose is a shift. Firstly, we propose that the neighborhood scale.
1 minute.
Neighborhood scale itself, it's a critical missing unit for policy making. What we propose is a shift from this traditional approach where we create new innovation infrastructure, new innovation districts with a very top-down approach, almost without, most of the times without the support of the sufficient data. We propose this new framework that allows for more bottom-up, data-driven approach to understand which are the factors that enable local innovation. Currently, I'm expanding this study in the US, trying to understand if the same features make sense in other states with more diverse socioeconomic data and context. And at the same time, I'm exploring what similar proxies could I use at the European context, compare Madrid and Barcelona metro areas. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, questions to Eleni?
Yes.
How do you see the role of the interaction between neighborhood factors and other level factors, national factors or city level factors? Is that something you can pick up in your model, or is that outside the scope?
No, actually, I started with the literature at the national and regional level. Some of the variables are well studied at these higher scales. For example, H1B visa applications is one of the well studied features, let's say, determinants for innovation by Saxenian. I could find the same indication that it's even, it remains a really good predictor at this lower scale. And in the same way, I started by introducing traditional indicators in my framework, but also add these new spatial factors, these new variables regarding about the macro environment. So I would say that the main contribution of these studies that these factors are discussed a lot in the theoretical frameworks, but not really empirically studied at this level.
Okay, question from me. You put in the end, and very eloquently, it's a lot of work what you're doing, and you put that the local scale is the missing link, is fundamental for innovation. But let me just be a bit of a devil's advocate, because if I work in a city like London, which is highly innovative, I don't necessarily interact with the people that live near me in Islington. But I move across the city to my post of work or to get in touch with other people at other universities. So I benefit from a bigger scale. Why should we then, if you can elaborate a bit more, focus much more on the neighborhood rather than on the mesoscale, which would be the city or the region?
Yeah, this is a great question, and this is the motivation how I started the work, because I really early on I identified that in the literature the way we measure the successful districts, innovation districts, is basically by case studies, right? If you think we discuss about Kendall Square or the Triangle Park in North Carolina or other studies, but we don't really quantify. So my main concern is that we propose funding for specific neighborhoods. We come with a very top-down approach. I think also, especially in Greece, the new research park in Thessaloniki is proposing an area outside of in the outskirts of the city, but without really assessing what are the dynamics of those neighborhoods. So my main aim is to quantify what is considered a good innovation district, what is considered, let's say, what are the main success factors, if I could, or enabling factors, because again, I'm not claiming causality, it's just a way to start assessing those associations in the first level.
Okay, thank you very much, Eleni. So, and now we move to the next presentation by Dr. Robert Pollock. So you can go to the podium, who is a visiting scholar at the College of Europe and formerly of the European Commission in Belgium. And he's going to be talking about just transition in a time of uncertainty, creating new industrial paths for political discontent. And if I understood it well, you're going to be comparing the cases of Scotland and Spain.
Yeah, indeed I am.
Good.
Yeah, so over the last 2 months, I've been researching the phasing out of oil extraction industries and the coal extraction industries, and looking at how we are phasing in new industries to compensate for the loss of employment and economic activity from the phasing out of carbon-intensive industries. And I'm recognizing that this is happening in a time of great uncertainty. Certainly now, there's political pushback about decarbonisation. We're also not seeing the anticipated level of job creation we expected in many regions from these new green industries that were being introduced. And this is leading to political discontent. So to consider this further, I thought I'd compare two carbon path-dependent regions. Obviously, by path dependency, we mean regions that are locked into long-term industrial and technological trajectories. And Asturias and northeastern Scotland certainly are path dependent in terms of carbon extraction. Asturias is in Spain known as the homeland of miners. And even in the 1990s, there were 20,000 miners working in Asturias. But that's not the whole story. The economy of Asturias was fundamentally linked to coal extraction for the generation of electricity, but also due to its industrial base, iron and steel, chemicals, etc. Very interlinked with coal extraction. They've now phased out their coal. The last mine, the San Nicolas mine, closed 2 years ago. And it has now many left behind place characteristics. So low levels of regional productivity, low levels of regional growth, etc. But they are phasing in these new green industrial paths. There's a strong regional emphasis on hydrogen. There's a strong emphasis on the renewable energy supply chain, both for offshore wind, onshore wind, and now for solar. And this is very much to mitigate the job losses in these coal communities, industrial communities. What is interesting is there's also been a lot of institutional innovation. So the Madrid government, a number of years ago, established the Just Transition Institute to guide the process of transition. But also within the Principality of Asturias, there's been a lot of institutional innovation with, for example, the establishment of the Asturian Just Transition Observatory. If we now look at northeastern Scotland, it is known as Europe's oil capital. There are still 120,000 people working in the UK oil and gas sector, and 1 in 5 jobs in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, northeastern Scotland, are actually linked with oil and gas industry. Obviously, this is in a process of phasing out, and we're already seeing these characteristics of a place being left behind, dropping off of productivity, growing levels of unemployment, etc. And this was actually one of the most competitive dynamic regional economies in the UK only 10 years ago outside London, and it's already suffering. Just look at house prices really going down. Again, they're hoping to phase in green industrial paths to mitigate for this loss of economic activity and employment. Offshore wind is a huge issue with big arrays, offshore wind farms off the east coast of Scotland planned and being constructed. And there's also a lot of emphasis on carbon capture and storage to extend the lifespan of the oil and gas extraction industry. There's also, tellingly, also institutional innovation, and the Scottish Government has established the Just Transition Commission. What is striking in both regions, and this is true across a lot of decarbonising regions in Europe, is the growing support for populist parties. And that is due in part due to the lack of progress in creating these new industrial paths and related employment. So how do you create new industrial paths? Well, this is quite interesting. I'm now circling back to my PhD, which I completed 7 years ago. And due to a career change, I went and became a consultant for the European Commission. I never kind of developed my PhD much further. And my PhD was actually looking at the emergence of regional industries in the UK based around offshore wind. And this is the conceptual framework which I used. So this is the notion that you have disruptive technological change. And if you harness that, in this case, it is renewable energy, you can create new regional industries, new regional industrial paths. But that is dependent on the interaction, the interplay of 3 determinants. The actors, they could be the private sector, the public sector, trade unions. Also the assets of a region, that's the labour force, physical industrial infrastructure, energy infrastructure, mechanisms, also the interaction of mechanisms. These can be endogenous or exogenous, such as inward investment or technology transfer. And that will determine the scale and character of the new path. What is key to this conceptual framework is the notion that these actors, these 3 determinants and their interaction is mediated by institutions, multi-level institutions. That is policy, regulation, legislation, etc. And they actually mediate the level of interaction. So the key message from this is institutions are important, coordination of institutions across levels is important, and institutional innovation is key. So there has been institutional innovation for just transition in both Spain and in Scotland. And over the last 2 months, I've been doing lots of interviews. So I've interviewed the head of the Just Transition Institute in Madrid, the head of the Just Transition Commission in Edinburgh. They may sound similar, but they're very different. So the Just Transition Institute has got a very strong emphasis on facilitating the interplay of actors and mechanisms and assets at the regional level, such as actually encouraging the growth of renewable energy projects. They sit within a government department, so they're directly influencing and coordinating legislation and regulation. They sit within an already strong multi-level governance system, as we see in Spain, and they're mediating between interconnected strategies. Because time is short, I'm not going to say much about Scotland, but to say it is a less developed a model with only an advisory role rather than a strategic mandate. So if we look at the Spanish strategic framework. We have the Spanish Just Transition Institute, and they are working with DG Regio, DG Ener, working on the EU Green Deal. There's also the Spanish Just Transition Strategy, which they are in charge of. They also have national social partner agreements with employers and trade unions, but they also work with the Asturian government on the Asturian Territorial Just Transition Plan, and they also have 3 sub-regional agreements for the most affected communities in Asturias, and those are co-governed with the Principality of Asturias. But the interesting thing is they also feed back into their own ministry, ecological transition and demographic challenge. They also feed into the wider Spanish government, and they're also working with other Spanish regions. So the notable characteristics of this framework is they recognize that Asturias is not treated as a bounded entity, but as part of an interconnected, interdependent set of regions within Europe, within Spain. Recognizes that regions with high levels of path dependency required coordinated multi-level support, and they are aiming to establish a stable and transparent hierarchy of codependent political authority and agency. So what have been the outcomes in Asturias and Scotland? As I say, this is a very sophisticated strategic framework. I'm doing something similar for Scotland, but I'm still finishing my interviews next week in the Scottish context. So in Asturias, we're actually seeing several new paths at scale or with potential scale emerge. We have the green energy supply chain around offshore wind, onshore wind and solar. We see some very large companies investing in Asturias, and there's also a significant hydrogen sector. And it's interesting that the OECD just last year noted that Asturias was something of an exemplar in regard to taking a coordinated approach, an investment approach to transition. We have seen the rise of sceptical populist parties, but arguably it's been quite moderate given the scale of industrial change. So Vox in the 2019 election took 6.4% of the regional vote. In 2023, they took 10%. And just as an aside, Aragon, which is another region that had significant coal mining communities, in its most recent regional elections, actually Vox performed more poorly in coal mining communities than the rest of the region, which says something about a very sophisticated approach to the transition. In northeastern Scotland, we are seeing actually quite limited path development. There are some notable initiatives, but they're not really a coherent portfolio of activities and investments. So we have things like the Energy Transition Zone, but it's quite telling that the Just Transition Commission in Scotland just 2 weeks ago noted that there is a lack of place-based planning in Scotland, and there is no just path to net zero through deindustrialisation, which I thought was a fantastic quote. And this is quite a striking stat to end on. There has been a notable rise of transition sceptical populist parties. In 2021, in the Scottish Parliament elections, Reform UK were polling at less than 0.5%. In current surveys, it looks like they're going to take 20% of the vote or more in northeastern Scotland. So I'll leave it there. How was that?
10:36.
Apologies.
Okay, so thank you very much. And questions to Robert? Yes, please.
So if you were to consult a government that would give out funds to regions which are facing coal phase out, could you identify any specific cluster that stands out in kind of diminishing industrial decline in those regions? If you would think for example, about infrastructure or research and development, education, stuff like this. Like, is there anything that would like kind of counteract those declines?
I think all coal regions are different and carbon intensive regions are different. Asturias has got a very diversified industrial base. So there's many things that can promote in terms of inward investment. For me, one of the most successful regions in Europe that has used the Just Transition Fund is Silesia in Poland, which has actually developed a lot of science parks, investment parks, and you're actually seeing a lot of investment in, say, the EV sector in Silesia. So you're seeing this quite a successful transition from coal to things like green bus technology. So I'd say Silesia is a good example.
Okay, just one question from me, very quick. You're comparing a coal mining region, a declining coal mining region, with a region that is dependent on oil and that was booming until very recently, as you said. How does the type of industry actually make a difference in terms of these transitions? And just to be the devil's advocate, wouldn't it be more appropriate for you to compare Asturias to one of the many, of course I understand you're Scottish, but many of the declining coal mining regions in the UK, like for example, the Welsh Valleys or the area around County Durham and in England?
I get this, a brilliant point. But throughout my career, I've always been interested in building a bridge between theory and practice.
Mm.
And to be honest, the big policy question for the UK is dealing with North Sea oil and gas phase out. Sadly, the Welsh mines, County Durham, those mines closed 30 years ago. What is a really pressing policy question is what do we do with these North Sea oil and gas jobs? And they are very different. So for example, Asturias, those jobs were geographically rooted in the hillsides of Asturias, whereas the oil and gas workforce is a lot more mobile. There is a very big concentration in Aberdeen, but if you look on the trains on a Friday night coming out of Aberdeen, they're filled with oil and gas workers going south.
But if I were to retort, yes, the Welsh Valleys, the coal areas closed 30 or 40 years ago, but they are, in most cases, still as depressed as they were when they were closed.
For sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, thank you. So now we move from Scotland to northern Spain and now to southern Spain, and we got Kaya Soli, who's a PhD candidate at the London School of Economics and has got a very interesting title, which is Leather in the Blood, and talking about the rural economic development of the Sierra Leone. So, which is specialized in leather when it doesn't rain too much.
Exactly.
So, are you ready?
Yes, I
And
am.
you can try to use the pointer if you want. I mean,
Yeah,
that's fine.
I'll have a go, yeah.
There you go. Okay, so you have 10 minutes and your 10 minutes start now.
Okay, thank you everyone. So as Andrea said, I'm a PhD student in the Department of Anthropology here at the LSE. And throughout this term that I've been affiliated with the centre, I've been writing up my thesis. I'm a fourth year student. And for me, I've done my thesis on a village in the Sierra de Cádiz, which I decided to pseudonymise as Hacinas, which is not its real name. If you're familiar with the region, you probably will recognise it. That's not the end of the world, but since I'm dealing with personal data, I've decided to keep the name off like public materials for now. And being affiliated with the centre has made me think about how this kind of anthropological research, which for many people is kind of like a little bit esoteric, a little bit abstract, can contribute to debates which concern us all, like rural development, for me also changing industry and migration. So usually in anthropology, we do these papers like red papers. And so that's what I prepared. And most anthropology papers start with little anecdotes from their time in the field. So that's what I'm going to do as well. So when I first arrived in Hacinas, a village of nearly 20,000 people in the mountains of Cádiz in Andalusia, I was told repeatedly that I'd chosen well. Not simply that the village was nice or interesting or a good thing to study, but that it was exceptional, singular, and beyond comparison. One man, an executive in the local leather industry, put it to me like this. Imagine yourself, you're in a great desert, like the Sahara, for example, and you walk through the desert for days and days, and then you come to an oasis, and the oasis has flowers and palm trees and water. He was going on in a way that's characteristic of Andalusia, in an eloquent, flowery sort of storytelling way. And he then paused to say, imagine the desert is Cádiz. The oasis is Hacinas. So this image of the oasis became key for me to understand what I was observing over the course of nearly 2 years of ethnographic fieldwork, here meaning living in this village and undertaking participant observation, interviews, and other methods like statistics and documentary analysis. So my PhD thesis is about Hacinas' leather industry, which supplies some of the world's most recognizable luxury brands, and how the village can be used as a case study in rural regeneration and development. But before I can make sense of the industry, I first had to understand the village that produced it and this powerful narrative of exceptionalism that gives villages shape. So what does it take for a small rural community to not only survive, but to thrive in the age of global supply chains and industrialization and centralization? This is at its core a question about rural development, about how places retain economic relevance, social cohesion, and a sense of collective future in the face of forces that seem indifferent, if not hostile, to their existence. So the villages have achieved something close to full employment, and it has done so while remaining, in nearly every meaningful sense, a village. My argument is that understanding how Athenas has accomplished this requires us to look beyond conventional frameworks of economic development, beyond infrastructure, investment, and skills policy, and attend seriously to the cultural and ideological work that communities perform to sustain themselves. Athenas is acutely aware of this, actually. Villages engage with it constantly in political debates, in how they market the leather industry, and in how they talk about, for example, immigration. And first, I want to say something about the broader context in which Athenas sits, because the village's exceptionalism is inseparable from a wider story about rural Spain and rural Europe. So across Europe, especially Southern Europe, the last half century has been marked by what Spanish planners call España vacía, empty Spain. Villages have hollowed out as populations moved to cities, young people left for the coast or for Northern Europe for jobs, and basic services like schools and doctors quietly disappeared. The Andalusian mountains were considered especially vulnerable, too remote, too poor, and too tied to an agrarian past with no future. But Athenas does not fit this story at all. It has bucked a trend so dramatically that people from neighbouring villages and visiting officials from the provincial capital of Cádiz, the city, treat it as almost an example. Cádiz, the province, has, at the time of writing, the second highest unemployment rate in Spain. Yet in Athenas, as people told me repeatedly, everyone eats. There's no poverty. It has now become the population centre of the Sierra, taking over from a neighbouring village. And it has the only secondary school, the only emergency medical centre, the only big police station, and the only supermarket, Mercadona, serving the entire surrounding mountain range. This has not happened by accident. It reflects decades of investment from the EU's rural regeneration funds, from regional government, and from private industry, combined with one crucial local asset, the ancient artisanal leather industry, that has against all odds continued to grow, even in the age of production being moved outside of Europe. Where deindustrialization has gutted other rural economies or regional economies, Athenas has found itself uniquely positioned in the global supply chain for luxury goods. At 7 in the morning, there's a queue of cars stretching down the hill into the village, coming into work, not leaving it. Understanding why Athenas has developed this way and what it has cost socially and culturally is one of the central questions my thesis tries to answer. And that question cannot be separated from the narrative which the village tells about itself. So what my fieldwork revealed is that village identity is not stable. It's an ongoing project, built through daily boundary making, through the selective use of history, through the careful calibration of tradition and modernity. The leather industry is both the economic engine and of the village prosperity and its most powerful symbol. To make sense of the factory, one first has to make sense of the oasis. This matters for rural development because it reveals how economic identity and cultural identity are, in practice, inseparable. The leather industry is not simply a sector of the local economy, it's the organizing principle of village life. So, leather in the blood, it's based on local saying, la piel en la sangre, or la piel está en nuestra sangre. And speakers of Spanish might note that in this village, people consequently use piel, which is most often used for skin, also human skin, instead of cuero. So it's a very kind of intimate sort of word choice. And this narrative is articulated most forcibly through a discourse of biological inheritance. In Athenas, leatherworking skill is understood not merely as a transferable competency, but as something transmitted through blood, hands, and ancestral memory, inalienable, place-specific, and irreproducible elsewhere. From a rural development perspective, this kind of narrative deserves careful attention. It is effectively a community's attempt to articulate and defend its competitive advantage, not in the language of productivity metrics or cost or skills audits, but in the language of culture, heritage, and collective identity. The head of Spain's National Leatherwork Association, himself not from the village but from Catalonia, told me this logic plainly. There's no other happiness in the world, he said. They know the leather, they can work the leather, because the leather is in their blood. This is what development scholars might recognize as an attempt to place brand, but one generated from below, rooted in lived experience and ancestry, and carrying significant social and economic weight for those who inhabit the village. It is also notably something that neither a regional government nor EU funding scheme can actually produce. One of the most striking things about Athenas is how deliberately its inhabitants mobilize history. The village has a deep sense of its own past, from the first Roman settlement to the resettlement after reconquest. History is invoked at festivals, in business meetings, and in the press dossier I was given at a leather event. It opened with the slogan, history, tradition, artisanship, fashion, culture. But this is also selective history. For example, the several centuries of Muslim rule are often ignored, even though it gave great shape to the village and also originated the name Andalusia from Al-Andalus. And also there's a tension between invented tradition and felt authenticity. The past is not simply remembered here in Athenas. It is curated, performed, and selectively deployed in the service of a present that is simultaneously anxious and aspirational and future-leaning. This discourse then has a harder edge we cannot afford to overlook. The narrative of inalienable, blood-borne craft is explicitly exclusionary. But this nativism is not merely social prejudice. It's a structural feature of how the village manages its developmental model. But it's by insisting that true artisanal knowledge is geographically situated and ethnically transmitted, Athenas' established community protects its claim to the industry's values. And as the demographic, even as the demographic and productive reality of this industry rapidly changes, because there is a paradox. Production is now largely moving out of the homes into factories. Production is now not done artisanal style, it's done as an assembly line, en cadena, people say. But crucially, this narrative is not external to economic development. It is economic development. One of the local kind of scholars in the village called it a sociological exception. It has preserved an industrial society and a coherent village identity through decades of change that holds out comparable communities across rural Andalusia. And as a village poet put it, those who do not know their past cannot create their future. In Athenas, that statement is not a platitude, it's a development strategy.
Thank you. Questions higher. Question 1, question 2, question 3, it's me. No, that's it. I mean, we have to run. Quick question.
Yeah.
Yes, you made a very eloquent point about how Athenas has become, despite all the challenges, a thriving place for leather making. It has always been. But you, as the crow flies, 40 kilometers to the south, you're in Morocco or less.
Yeah.
And there you have a thriving leather industry in which the labor, the leather itself, the tanning and all the processes are actually far cheaper than what you get in Athenas. Why is it, in spite of all this, is it just a local factor, or do they have some sort of advantages that make them be also dynamic in the face of external competition?
That is kind of what this paper tries to make sense of a little bit, because with European kind of costs, European wages, obviously it's more expensive to produce there than in both Morocco and China and also other countries that do leather work. Yet still many leather brands that people wear all over London produce their goods there and not elsewhere. And part of it is this kind of narrative of artisanship, of leather being in the blood. People also say that people make magic with their hands, that there's a quality to the fabrication that's kind of inalienable from its geographical context. I've also been told it's partly due to, for example, European, like there's a consumer demand for more ethical production, especially after kind of what would you call like exposés about sweatshops and stuff like that, that being European produced with living wages and stuff like that is a big marketing factor in the luxury market as well.
Okay, so thank you very much, Kaya. I was going to ask why are you not wearing Hina's leather, but that's another question. So we now move, thank you very much. We now move to Anna Solms. And Anna is a PhD candidate at the Halle Institute of Economic Research in Germany. I think it's in Saxony-Anhalt. And she's going to talk about refugee inflows and regional adjustment in an aging economy, a dynamic general equilibrium analysis.
I'm trying to move it forward.
Yeah, I'll go back. Okay, so you have 10 minutes and your 10 minutes start now.
All right, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that is trying to investigate the influence of refugee inflows on the regional level within an aging economy, namely Germany and German federal states, using a dynamic spatial general equilibrium model in order to investigate long-run impacts. So demographic change is a defining feature in many advanced economies, where aging population and declining fertility shape the evolution of local labor markets. In Germany, there's a particularly strong divide when it comes to demographics. So younger metropolitan regions are largely concentrated in Western federal states, whereas a lot of the Eastern federal states, which belong to the former GDR, are characterized by an aging population and declining fertility. And in 2015, a lot of people from Syria fled the Syrian civil war, which created a sudden labor supply shock for Germany. And a key question that this paper is now trying to answer is, how does this labor supply shock affect federal states that are characterized by different demographics and economic structures? In theory, there are two possible outcomes, or the effect of this labor supply shock is ambiguous. So for one, it could be that refugees that tend to be younger than the average population alleviate demographic decline and counteract labor shortages in aging economies, therefore dampening growth disparities. On the other hand, it could be that refugees tend to settle more in economically stronger regions and more urban regions, which therefore reinforces agglomeration forces and amplifies regional inequality. I will skip the literature slide, but in general, there is a lot of literature that analyzes migration waves on the national level, but this can mask the substantial heterogeneity observed on the local level, in particular when the labor supply shock is characterized by a different age structure than the incumbent population, and also regional inequality within countries, which is a gap this paper is trying to fill. The model that is used here features households which are divided into, this is actually wrong. So they are divided into two age groups. They have perfect foresight. They decide where to live and work subject to wages, mobility frictions, and preferences, which constructs bilateral migration flows between regions. Firms produce using young and old age labor and local capital structures. They trade across regions. Then there are capital owners who invest in local capital structures. They are forward-looking. And in equilibrium, the goods, labor, and capital markets clear so that wages, prices, and returns adjust. This constructs the baseline economy, and in the counterfactual scenario, refugees are being fed into the economy as unanticipated labor supply shock. For the data, mainly data for the labor from the EU Labor Force Survey is being used, because from there you can infer migration flows between regions for a given year, based on age differentiation, but also based on the employment status. And also some Eurostat data is being used, and European Commission trade data. This is the distribution of the labor supply shock. This is not super interesting, which is why I want to talk a little bit more about the results of the simulation. So here you can see the percentage deviation of the counterfactual scenario featuring the labor supply shock relative to the baseline scenario without refugees. You can see here across regions that all, when you look at the GDP variable, that all regions are actually profiting in terms of GDP. And those profits range from 0.1 to 1.1% relative to the baseline scenario. Those gains in GDP are closely mirrored by gains in the capital stock, where the mechanism is as follows. So you have the labor supply shock, which is like coming into the economy. This is reducing the capital intensity for the given economies, which is increasing the marginal product of capital in the mid to long term, and therefore increasing the rental rate of capital, triggering investment into the capital stock, and therefore increasing the capital stock for all regions. The employment response is a bit more heterogeneous. So you see some outmigration in terms of employment for several states. You also see some employment expansions, especially in the Western, more metropolitan regions. This is mirroring the fact that the workers respond to changes in wages. So if the so due to the labor supply shock, there's pressure on wages, which affects the future utility of workers, and therefore there happens some reallocation between regions. Now coming to the distributional results, when you look here at the households divided into two age groups, you see that both age group, like across age groups, households tend to slightly lose in terms of welfare following the labor supply shock. And you can also infer the like a spatial pattern here. So we see that regions in the east are losing less in terms of welfare than regions in the west, which is mirroring the fact that in the eastern regions, they are structurally older. So following a labor supply shock, the competition in the labor market might not be as strong as in labor-intensive regions in the West. What you can also see is that young age households across all regions lose slightly more in terms of welfare than old age households, which can be explained by that young age households, they have a longer working horizon, so they place a larger weight on the future expected path of wages, therefore the larger the effects. For capital owners, we see gains across all regions, and those gains also exceed the losses of the households. And we can also see a spatial pattern again, where we see that gains are relatively small in the eastern regions, which is due to the fact that those eastern regions are quite capital intensive. So the capital labor ratio is already quite high, leading to a more muted increase in the rental rate of capital, which therefore explains then less welfare for capital owners. I will skip this. And so to conclude, overall, I find that the labor supply shock driven by the refugees creates a positive output and capital responses across all regions. There is some heterogeneous adjustment, which is due to internal reallocation of workers and transition dynamics. We also see that initial conditions matter for the size of the gains. So in the mechanisms section, I found that the higher the initial GDP per capita, the larger the gains, which can therefore alleviate existing spatial disparities. For the distributional effects in the steady state, there is a slight reallocation from labor income to capital income, and which I think makes the analysis of the regional, or like this regional disparities, the results makes the analysis of this or undermines the importance of the analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very much. Do we have time for one question? One question one, one question two, one question three. So my turn then. You showed that the labor supply shock seems to have a worse impact, mainly the most prosperous areas of Germany, the south of Germany, Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, and the most positive in East Germany. And yet, from a political perspective, what you have is that most Länder in Western Germany and the population in Western Germany seems to be far more welcoming of migrants than in East Germany. Why do you think that's the case?
So for one, the GDP increases actually, so in the prosperous regions are actually quite high. So you see here in the Western regions, they are quite high compared to a lot of the Eastern regions. Saxony-Anhalt is actually an outlier there. And I think, so you're talking towards the attitude towards migrant. I think this has a more structural, there are more structural issues underlying. So a lot of the populations in the former GDR states in Germany, they are very discontent, and this roots into, so you have high unemployment rates in the East, you have low GDP per capita, and there's actually, so after reunification, you would expect, if institutions are the same, that Eastern German states would have caught up to the level of GDP that you see in Western German states, but this is not the case actually. Those regions to date have not really caught up to the level of output, and I think this is, among many other reasons, one reason why people are very discontent, and then it's very easy to blame minorities instead of other factors.
Okay, thank you very much, Hannah. So he's a PhD candidate at the Alexandru Ioan Cuza University of Iași in Romania. And she's going to be talking about what drives regional digitalization, understanding digital inequalities across the EU. It's up to press that and then it should work.
Okay.
So you have 10 minutes and your 10 minutes start now.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Ioana Ursache. I'm a PhD candidate at Alexandru Ioan Cuza University of Iași, and today I'm going to be presenting a small part of the PhD thesis, looking at what drives regional digitalization and how we see digital divides across the EU. Just to give you a bit of context on my PhD thesis, my research wants to explore the performance of smart cities in Romania, especially in the way they use technology to improve the quality of life of residents. A general understanding of smart cities is that they use ICTs to increase and improve urban services, governance, and everyday life. But we have an important question here. If smart cities focus so much on digital technologies, how can they achieve their objective of increasing quality of life if not all people have access or benefit from these technologies? And we know that digitalization has become a key piece in economic development, innovation, and access to services. But we also see that across Europe, we have persistent patterns of disparity. We have certain regions that are very performant in terms of digitalization, and others are left behind. So the digital divide is the concept that covers this topic. And since
most of the studies that were done so far are focusing on the individual level in terms of digital divide. We also noticed that there are certain factors that operate at regional and national level that can impact digitalization. So my question for this part of the analysis is what structural factors drive regional digitalization across the EU? If we look at the digital divide literature, it covers inequalities in access, use, and benefits gained from digital technologies. And the literature distinguishes 3 levels. The first one is access. The second one is skills and patterns of use, which I will focus on this study. And the third one is outcomes, which is harder to measure, but I will try to do it for the main part of my PhD thesis. And also research has explored different factors that influence a digital divide from socio-demographic, socio-economic types of technology, personal characteristics, and more recently looking at various structural conditions like investments, institutional quality, governance, and so on. So for this analysis, I used Eurostat data focusing on NUTS2 regions for the period 2014 to 2024. I combined indicators related to digital economy and society and some other structural variables, where I also added the European Quality of Government Index and an urbanization proxy, because my topic being on cities, I needed to see that in detail. If we look at the results, the indicators that I used for the digital index explain different types of or patterns of internet usage. And they all seem to be positively correlated and explain one common dimension of digitalization. So based on those, I predicted a digital index. And if we look at the evolution and distribution of this index, we see that over the analyzed period, the distributions remain around the EU mean. But if we look at how it varies across the regions, we see that the disparities persist over the analyzed time. I also tested to see if we have any differences in terms of urban and less urban areas, and the difference seems to be significant. So that's why I also kept the urban dummy for the next models. I first explored the panel regression, estimated a panel model where I added all the structural factors in my analysis. So access to internet, which we cannot use the internet if we do not have access to it. Education, the share of IT in the economy, and GDP per capita. All of these indicators turned out to be significant. So we can confirm the hypothesis that socioeconomic factors such as economic development, human capital, and the presence of ICT-related economic activity influence regional digitalization. Then I estimated another model in which
5 minutes.
I added the interaction between urban dummy and the time dimension. And we see that household internet access and the GDP per capita continue to be significant, and the interaction of urban and time dimension continue to be positive over time, especially in the years from 2015 to 2020. From then on, we see that they are not positive, significant anymore, which we can link to the effects of the pandemic. Because of the pandemic generated a lot of policy responses and investment in digital infrastructure everywhere. But the regions that might have benefited most in that time were the ones that were less urban, because we see also a change in the significance in 2024 again. So the more urbanized regions tend to exhibit higher levels of digitalization, apart from the years following the pandemic. And finally, I also estimated a cross-sectional model for the most current year to see the situation at the current time. For me, the latest year was 2024, based on data availability. First, I mapped out the digital index across European regions. We see the same patterns that we see almost in inequality analysis, that Northern and Western Europe has higher digitalization levels, while Eastern Europe and Southern Europe are below the EU average. In terms of the relation between digitalization and the structural factors, we see that internet access continues to be relevant, together with the share of ICT together with the tertiary education. What came up interesting in this analysis is the European Quality of Governance Index. So it seems that institutions do play a key role in digitalization, especially in 2024. To wrap up, beside technological access, other socioeconomic indicators can explain digitalization. Economic development, human capital are the key drivers. We also see a lot of differences in territorial characteristics, particularly in urban areas. And governance quality can also be studied in order to see how we can bridge those digital divides in regions, which I will try to do for the next part. So,
Thank you. Who would like to ask a question? Oh, yes, please go ahead, Lenny.
Yeah, so no, great presentation. A question is about mostly if you compare your composite indicator that you created with other existing composite indicators, what is like your main contribution there, and how would you like to elaborate this? How would you like to develop more this study? What other indicators that are not currently included would you consider that would be?
because of data availability is not so good. Most indicators use use-based indicators from Eurostat, basically, and not a lot of them include the third level divide, because that is focused on outcomes and that is harder to measure because you need to actually include people's perception of their lives after they have used digital technologies. So that's what I'm trying to do for the next part of my thesis, trying to complete it, because what we can do with secondary data is basically just typical access to internet and what kind of patterns of usage we have.
All right, so thank you very much. In the interest of time, we're going to keep it to one question. That's it. So thank you very much, Joanna. And now we move to the next presentation. In this case by Yan Hao Jiang. He's a PhD candidate at the University of Bristol. And he's going to be talking about demand for skills, relatedness, complementarity as a driver for regional diffusion and concentration. How you have, are you ready?
Yes, 10 minutes.
So you have 10 minutes and your 10 minutes start
Okay.
now.
Cool. Hello everyone. My name is Hao, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Bristol. Today I'm going to introduce you with my research, demand for AI skills, relatedness, complementarity as a driver for regional innovation and regional diffusion and concentration. Demand of AI skills is unevenly distributed across regions. This figure shows that the average regional share of AI jobs in regional labor markets in Great Britain is unevenly distributed. For instance, large regions like London, Edinburgh have a large share of AI jobs, and on average between the 2016 to 2024. And then also some medium cities, regions like Bristol, Leeds, and like Coventry, they also have large share of AI jobs, and also obviously Cambridge and Oxford as innovation centers, and also some small regions like Leamington Spa and some regions in Wales and in Scotland. They also have large scales. So there are academic debates about demand for AI jobs or demand for AI skills. From the field of labor economics, researchers argue that company internal resources determine firm level demand for AI skills or jobs. And also from another perspective, like geography of innovation, researchers argue that or demonstrate that like technological relatedness density influences regional level specialization in AI technologies and also such industrial diversification. So that's from the regional level. And from another perspective, like evolutionary economic geographers, they also argue that regions as a competitive market, providing local companies with a large markets in order to advertise and sell their products or services for large markets. And in this way, local companies are more likely to ensure increasing returns to scale because they are benefit from a large markets. And also a region as a innovation ecosystem also provide local companies, organizations with human capital pools, with high quality infrastructure such as ICT, network, something like that. And also a region is also considered as a place with specific contexts and institutions. So there are academic debates in terms of labor demand for AI skills. And my research mainly focuses on regional skill relatedness density, influencing companies seeking AI skills and spatially concentrating their AI skill demand in regions. Okay, existing research also from these fields, from these perspectives, three perspectives. For instance, labor economists, they find that firm sizes, the growth rate of firms, and also investment influences the firm level demand for AI jobs. And also geography of innovation, they consider ICT related patterns and also intra and extra regional AI technological relatedness influencing regional specialization in AI related technologies. And evolutionary economic geographers also find that the level of human capital, just like the research just said, human capital, occupational structure like IT jobs, professional jobs, and also top universities influence local and regional demand for AI jobs. Then there is a research gap that how the company demand for AI skills is related to the availability of other non-AI skills in regional labor markets. So my research mainly investigates the company demand, the likelihood of company generating demand for AI skills, and also the likelihood of multi-locational companies spatially concentrating the AI skill demand in regions. So my research is more like a multi-scale research rather than at a single level. Okay, for instance, from the skill complementarity perspective, AI skills can be combined with non-AI skills in various application domains such as law, business services, creative and cultural activities, biology, physics, chemistry, something like that. And from another perspective, like skill relatedness, AI skills can be combined with AI-related skills such as information technology and also mathematical modeling skills to develop state-of-the-art AI algorithms or innovation. So my research mainly distinguish a skill relatedness density of the AI complementary skills and also skill relatedness density of AI related skills. My results find that if a region with its skill portfolios, denser skill portfolios, more related. If a region with its skill portfolio to which AI is complementary, with greater relatedness to AI, then local companies are more likely to generate AI jobs or to generate AI labor demand. And also, this effect also increases the likelihood of multi-locational companies spatially concentrating their own AI skill demand in this region. In contrast, skill relatedness density of AI-related skills, such as IT and math skills, they have either negative or insignificant effect on both livelihoods. And my research contributes to the existing theory in economic geography, mainly by developing a measurement of skill relatedness density between AI complementary and AI related skills. Then our research statistically test a framework of AI's skill relatedness and complementarity to explain the generation and spatial concentration of the company demand for AI skills. That's my research contributions. Then I will skip some slides. And then in my research, I use online job advertisements to be the proxy of labor demand for specific skills. Then I select AI jobs. I define a job as an AI job if these job with at least one general AI keyword like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and also another specific AI keywords like LLM boost or neural networks, something like that. Then I define them AI jobs. And then I use a multi-level logic regression at the company level and also a regional level. At the company level, I mainly control firm random intercepts to control firm heterogeneity among regions in each year. And then I also conduct many robustness tests by separating company groups and then to separately conduct regression, these multi-level logic regression, and results remain robust. At the regional level, I'm mainly interested in AI skill relatedness density of AI complementary skills and AI related skills. And then I controlled many, I have many control variables. For example,
1 minute.
employment specialization, occupational proportion, and also the share of large company, job and population density, internet speed, and also the number of top universities. And then directly go to the conclusions. Local companies are more likely to seek and spatially concentrate their AI skills in regions with greater relatedness density of the AI complementary skills. My explanation is that it's more likely for local companies to apply AI skills in various application domains. For instance, they adopt AI in various sectors or tasks, like in business services, like I said, cultural creative activities. In contrast, the AI related skills have a insignificant effect. And my explanation is that it's less likely for local companies to apply AI in order for creating new AI algorithms. And that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Good. One question, Robert.
Yeah, that map at the beginning was really interesting, showing the demand for AI related skills. There were some surprising results on it. Like there was rural areas that I couldn't quite understand. I used to be head of economic development for a guy on Butte Council about 20 years ago, and I can't really imagine why there is such a high level of demand. And you see it in other rural areas. Have you got any insights on that?
Yes, that's a good point. And this is one main current limitation in my research. And for the next step, I'm going to do another robustness test by redefining my AI jobs with a very specific technical keywords. And then I would do robustness tests again. And then I would see whether my results change or not. But yes, you are totally right. And this is my one main issue.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Hao. So let's go to the next one in the interest of time.
Thanks.
So, Hao Zhou.
I have one more.
And if you want to eat, you can do it on otherwise we don't eat because we're not getting we are right behind schedule. So So Taoso, PhD candidate at King's College London, who's going to be talking about global value chain reconfiguration under US-China geopolitical tension, via supply relationship transformation in Vietnam's triangular trade.
Yeah, so first apologize for the topic. I think I have to bring everybody traveling from Europe to the Southeast Asia today because I haven't finished the second project regarding to the European one yet. So
you have 10 minutes.
Okay, so the 10 minutes start right now, right? Okay, so I'm very excited to share the topic here about global value chain reconfiguration and US-China geopolitical tension. I mainly focus on Vietnam triangular trade flows here. So why we want to conduct the topics here? Because the US-China tariff escalation has actually enforced the multinational firms operating in China to reconsider the global strategies, like also relocate the centers like manufacturing plants operating in China to the third party country. We call the strategy as a reshoring strategy. Like before that, we only have like shoring or outsourcing, but here we have nearshoring, friendshoring, or even backshoring. I also call that kind of thing that China plus one or China plus many. They will just partially relocate the operate things to the third party country. And we here just treating Vietnam as a very important strategic role here because of the tariff arbitrage position and also geographical proximity to China and also comprehensive well-established supply network here. Many literature right now actually just treated the buyer-supplier relationships as a static backdrop. But how about the dynamic change going through the things? So we just want to try to find out the things within the product networks dynamically. So I just developed three closely related questions, like do tariff shocks actually activate the triangular trade processing through Vietnam instead of like just many transshipment hub? And how do the upstream, we say Chinese supplier and also the downstream US buyer relationships adjust differently, like in speed and also the time? Do triangular trade firms in Vietnam develop the local sourcing? That was the main contribution of the research actually. Yeah, because nobody like conduct the three things in the triangular firms and they only consider like the buyer and also the supplier in US and also China. Okay, so we actually try to use a real option theory like in strategic management, international business, and also the finance field, embedded into the global value chain governance and also the global production network in the economic geography. As a new, standing new like framework here, we treat buyer supplier relationships as embedded options, exercise like under geopolitical uncertainty. Because how could we balance the commitment and also the flexibility to avoid and also to figure out about the geopolitical uncertainty, especially under US-China trade war? So we developed three hypotheses here. One is we assume that the value-added processing is still just transshipment in Vietnam. And the second, we think about like is we'll have staged adjustment instead of like just one single time relocation here. The third one would be the local sourcing, treating as a complementary things instead of a substitution to the intermediate from China. And so how could we test the hypothesis here? I collect over 34 million shipment records from Vietnam custom data from 2018 to 2019 daily basis, but I just aggregated into a quarter data because to avoid any seasonal bias and also especially like the Chinese New Year. Before and after that, it was surged, but during that time, like the holiday and also the New Year, nobody will like conduct business at the time. And we actually identify over 7,000 triangular firms here, and only 3,000 of them just appeared before the first wave of US-China tariff escalation. And we just treat that kind of things as a baseline, as a primary sample here, to avoid any endogeneity issue. But interestingly, the baseline firms actually account for over 80% of Vietnam's exports to the US. It's quite huge. Okay, so I just show you a little bit of things about the identification strategy here. Okay, I will not go through everything. So we try to build up a treatment variable, which is a firm level tariff exposure, and based on the shipment record, we use like the total export to US as a baseline, and also use the like weighted share, and also like the treatment with the difference, or with the increase percentage toward the US and China tariff.
5 minutes.
Tariff things here. To get a continuous difference in difference. We also use the triple difference in difference to ruling out anything about like whether that kind of things it just caused by the general like trade expansion in Vietnam or not. We also think about like some product family difference in difference. So we compare the processing value with the transshipment value. Okay, before going through like the main result, I just want to show you something like this practically. So the US actually imposed tariff on Chinese goods in several rounds, in total 5 waves. Starting July 2018, that would be the first 3 waves here. But the most significant escalation came in May 2019 and also the September 2019. So what we actually can find, the triangular trade firms respond sharply only to May 2019 escalation, and also for the September's one. Right now, you may just wonder what kind of products like dominate the triangular trade flows. And I just can tell you, like, the imports from China are actually dominated by intermediates, or the parts and raw materials, but the US exports are dominated by consumer and also the capital goods here. Okay, let me give you a very quick sense about the first evidence here. So here we will only focus on the IQR. We say it's a difference in tariff response between high exposure and also low exposure firms. And if we compare the low exposure firm and the high exposed one, actually will increase the intermediate imports from China by over 150%. And the US final goods export will actually increase by over 200%. And okay, I'll just keep here. But the most striking and fascinating thing would be here. We say based on the product family decomposition, we say the import and export under the same product family, right? We say the process imports and exports actually rise progressively if you look at the top panel here. But if we think about the transshipment import and exports, nothing happened, just near to 0. Another thing is, if we decompose it further, like to get consumer and capital goods, then we find that value-added process mainly occurs in consumer goods, not in the capital-intensive goods trade here. Okay, but what happened about the upstream and also the downstream, like supplier and buyer relationships here? We found that upstream Chinese supplier will expand immediately. Okay, just if you look at here, just after the waves 1 to 3. But for the downstream US buyers, they may even like just quit and then just defer their activities, or finally re-enter into the market. Why does this happen? Actually, the real option theory can help us to understanding that kind of things. They just want to balance like the commitment and also the flexibility. They want to measure and to make sure that the switching cost will not be very high. If they want to like find a new buyer actually. Okay, how about the local sourcing one? And we can find something very interesting. Like local intermediate sourcing only surged in expansion period. We say after the 4th wave, nothing happened. Just we see in 2018, the 3rd quarter here. But if we only look at the processing chain here, within the matched product family, like they import and export the same groups of their product. What we can find, the US final goods export actually respond more strongly. The second will be the intermediate import from China. The third will be the local intermediate sourcing. And the output value exceeding input values, which actually just give us a sense, insight of that. It's a processing chain, but true value added instead of like the transshipment. Okay, And the final one is local capacity boundary. We say the Chinese imports without local alternatives. Like if you're running a business like in Vietnam, and then if you have a local alternative, then you will just reduce the import from China. So then we say the local sourcing actually complements the Chinese intermediates, also bounded by the product level supply infrastructure. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, one question.
Yeah.
One question one, one question two, one question three, so down to me. Very interesting research, but you're forgetting one important part. No criticism, but for you to consider is geopolitics. Vietnam fought less than 40 years ago a war with China and has territorial disputes with China. You avoid the pandemic, but you have all these problems and there might be a shift. To what extent does geopolitics also play a role in the changes in trade that you are seeing in Vietnam?
Yeah, actually, my next step would be collect the data set from 2023 to 2025, to think about the Trump 2.0 just happening right now, because Trump actually wanna impose the tariff in Vietnam right now. But the many things I will think that argue that as a firms, traveling firms in Vietnam will move very fast right now, compared to the first wave, or we say the first 5 waves happened in 2018 to 2019. Then maybe I also need to build up another geopolitical index to measure that. Yeah, for the institution quality or the policies, regulations.
Okay, thank you very much. Also, yeah, and now last but not least, Rudy Fernandez Escobedo, who is a research fellow at the University of Galway in Ireland, who is going to be talking about mapping the geography of the digital economy, agglomeration and territorial divergence in Europe.
I promise this will be very quick.
Okay. So you have 3 minutes now. You have 10 minutes and your 10 minutes start now.
Okay, right now. Well, my name is Rudy. I'm delighted to be here sharing with you my research. Very nice research you had. Very excited for my own research as well. This is my piece of research right now, mapping the digital economy, agglomeration and concentration and territorial divergence in Europe. Why this is important and why it matters? I can click, yeah, don't worry. Well, it matters because digital economy is not spreading evenly across the European territory. Cohesion policy assumes that investment, another kind of policy, can help the regions to keep up with another one more developed. But if digital activity follows agglomeration logic, with clusters already shows, then policy assumption is wrong, and lagging regions face a structural disadvantage that spending alone public budget cannot fix. Then this is what the literature knows and cannot tell us. The literature explains how digital economy reshapes agglomeration, producing innovation-related outcomes. However, there are a lot of fragmented concepts: digitalization, digital transformation, digitization, ICT adoption, smart specialization, platform economies, etc., etc. And there are a lot of studies are exposed bias. Studies measure outcomes after transformation, not during transformation. Time as a control variable, not the object of analysis. And theoretical fragmentation, economic agglomeration studies or approach versus regional innovation system approach. This is how the studies are dispersed about the geography. A lot of studies are concentrated in Europe, China, not much in Latin America, North America neither. Africa and Oceania is absent in this kind of literature. And then we have a new panel dataset for European and digital agglomeration. Almost 2 million firms from European Union 27 plus United Kingdom. And I took 27 NACE4 codes across 4 categories: ICT services, high-tech manufacturing, research and development service, software publishing, adapted for Industry 4.0 framing, includes electromedical equipment, engineering, consultancy, technological testing, and then apply some location quotient, quite basic, still powerful tool for a description of this kind of phenomena. As you can see, the location quotient there is a quite concentration in these regions. This is 2016. this 2023. You can see barely any change from one map to the other. There is the same regions are concentrating the activity of digital companies. You can see any region from your own interest here. It's part of South England, Germany, Western Germany, some scattered points in France, Eastern Europe. Well, this maps by itself is not able to shows us the change. So I applied and I compute absolute change in location quotient for digital sector in employment. So in this map, you can see, still, despite the digital employment is growing up, keeping up with the general employment, and almost all countries have a rising employment in digital sector and technology association sectors. There is, for example, Spain, with the location quotients almost the same, with no absolute change. Some change in Italy, most of the changes in Germany, Central Europe, is part of UK as well. Nothing in Ireland. So the preliminary evidence suggests that digital employment growth does not reduce territorial disparity, but largely occurs within already specialized regions. Then, of course, there's some literature showing off that digital adoption is going faster in agglomeration economies, but that's something expected. And the thing is, these three open questions: path dependence or branching, are high location quotients regions locked into digital specialization, or there is another evidence of cluster formation in regions traditionally lagging regions? What drives the divergence? Is the Nordic advantage explained by firm size, industry mix, government efficiency, or something else? Can we disentangle agglomeration economies from selection effects per se? And the third one is, does concentration improve firm performance? Although firms in high LQ regions adopt digital technologies faster, or does proximity to digital cluster improve productivity? That's the next stage of this research. Well, these findings contribute to ongoing debates on territorial cohesion and geography of discontent, suggesting that digital transformation might reinforce existing regional inequalities rather than promoting social spatial convergence. Well, this is a policy hook. If digital concentration is self-reinforcing rather than self-correcting, smart specialization strategies that bids on digital upgrading in leisure regions face a structural headwind. So there's a no market failure that policy can easily fix. I promise this will be quick. So
Quick, so thank you very much. Question one. Yes, Eleni, now you can go.
Okay, so yeah, great presentation. I was wondering, so now with AI, we assume that we might have more and more access to knowledge that is more distant, like less related to our existing knowledge. I might study architecture or urban planning, but I get more easily access to information about economics or other kind of disciplines. So I assume that we might see that agglomeration economies might matter less, like since we can work from distance.
yeah.
Maybe the physical proximity might not have the same value in the future. I don't know, like what's your...
That's the original promise of digital transformation, that proximity will matter less with, the evidence for the last 10 years is proximity still matters a lot, even for technology and technology.
The last 10 years, which years did you capture? Like after AI, like 2020?
From 2016 to 2023.
23. Basically, the AI,
Explode, yeah. Explode, yeah.
2022, so I guess it's a work in progress.
Yeah, it's a work in progress, definitely. It's still literature after before 2015 of the systematic literature review is fairly scarce before 2015. Yeah, but great insights, Eleni. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rudy. Thank you very much to you all for this research speed dating. So plenty of topics to consider, plenty of topics to ponder. For those of you following us online, so plenty of things to think about. And also, please do follow us on either our channels, which are either normally LinkedIn or X, but also on our YouTube channel where this is going to be displayed. And now we're all going to keep discussing about the topics and research we have done at in a restaurant. So please gather your things because we have 5 minutes to get to the room.